picture.
Okay, then. Thank you for joining. I want to welcome Dr. Perricone. Are you Perricone? Are you starting your video?
Yes, let's see if we'll hit it now.
Okay.
Is that working?
Perfect. Yes. So thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to welcome you to this Fire Chat. You are a very, very interesting individual. I'd be remiss of us not to take advantage of getting you to give us viewpoints on especially in anti-aging, as well as in general about what you've been up to. I'd love for you to give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself, and then I will have Karl introduce himself later.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I have a rather unusual background in that as an undergraduate, I was an English literature major, and then went into the workplace actually I spent small time in the U.S. Army, and then went into the workplace and started working for a nonprofit health organization, which I very much enjoyed, and working with children, and did that for about 5 years, and then moved into the business sector because I decided I wanted to go to medical school. So I didn't start medical school until I was 29, which was rather unusual. At those days, it was pretty much people finishing their undergrad moved right into med school, and I really much enjoyed it, and I really threw myself into it and managed to accelerate my path in medical school. So I graduated in about 2.5 years, then went on and did a pediatrics residency at Yale University, and from that I went into dermatology. I also managed to get myself a degree in nutrition during that process. So it was a rather unusual background for anybody. But what really triggered me was in medical school, looking under the microscope in a course called histopathology, where we had to see what diseases look like under a microscope. I saw a squamous cell cancer, and it was surrounded by evidence of inflammation. And for those of us who have not used a microscope, they use staining, and what it looks like is confetti around the tumor. And I talked to my professors. I said, is it possible that inflammation could be driving this process? And I think it was pretty much a knee-jerk reaction. The professor said, no, this is your immune system reacting, which seemed like a very strange thing to say to me because cancer bypasses the immune system. And so I took that with me, and then when I started my pediatrics residency, it was quite interesting. They were looking at children with an asthma, and they started giving them vitamin C every day. And the vitamin C decreased the reactive airway incidence by about 50%. And so it had to be working on an anti-inflammatory mechanism. So with these things that happened, whether it was medical school or my residency, it put me on the right path. And I thought it was quite interesting. Then starting dermatology, looking under the microscope at all disease processes, it's quite interesting. When looking at young skin, there was no inflammation present. And yet aged skin had inflammation, even though there was no pathology present. So at that time, I put together my inflammation, aging, disease theory, and worked with that. And I started looking at antioxidants as natural anti-inflammatories. So started treating patients with topical certain forms of vitamin C and others, and found that I had a very good clinical response, and also started filing patents while I was still a resident in dermatology. When leaving that, I started my practice, and also using nutrition, I thought to myself, well, we know why there's inflammation in the skin because it's the interface between us and the environment. But what's driving inflammation in heart and arteries and brain, everything I looked at under the microscope. And I decided it has to be what we're doing many times a day, which is eating. So I came to the conclusion that there are foods that are pro-inflammatory, foods that are neutral, and there are foods that are anti-inflammatory. And it was pretty simple because it came down to what our grandmother told us to eat: fresh fruits and vegetables and fish. And I call that the anti-inflammatory diet. What was really remarkable was when I put people on this diet in my practice, they got better faster. And so we can use Western medicine plus nutrition. And what I noticed was when someone ate an anti-inflammatory diet, they had this absolutely beautiful radiance that came to their skin within 3 days. And I thought this is really onto it because the nice thing about practicing dermatology, as you can see the results of the work, as opposed to say internal medicine and lowering someone's blood pressure. You don't see that happen. And so I took all of this, and I was very intrigued with my patients, and I thought I wanted to tell my colleagues about it. So I wrote a book, and it was rather scientific. And a book agent met me at some conference I was speaking at. She said, Gia, I'd like to see this book you're writing for your fellow physicians. And I gave it to her. I said, it's pretty boring, actually, for a non-scientist. And she thought it was great. And so we went ahead and we published that book. And unfortunately, they changed the title from my scientific title to something that I think trivialized the contents. They called it the Wrinkle Cure. But anyway, it caught on, and we sold about 2 million books, and just went all over the world in terms of our appearances to talk about how this works. So at the same time, I've been filing for patents with topical anti-inflammatories. So it all came together, and I was working in my practice, and I went to all of the big corporations in the world who were in skincare. So Johnson & Johnson and Estee Lauder and L'Oreal, and nobody was interested in the technology at all. So I had to make a decision, which I didn't want to make. I said, I guess I have to start my own company. Wasn't interested in that, but I did. And it worked out really well. I mean, profits and also the growth was enormous, and the feedback I got was very positive. So I just kept on working, but I had other interests as well. I was interested in physics all of my life, and started looking at things. And then, matter of fact, right after 9/11, I was quite concerned about the vulnerability of our commercial flights from shoulder-held rockets, which were available on the black market. So I fortunately had the resources, and I started putting together my ideas what I could do to prevent that, and work with Texas A&M Aerospace, and patents were issued for that. And Homeland Security mandated Congress to pay for it. Unfortunately, as I was moving forward and the patents were issued, the patent kind of disappeared. And I found out finally through my senator that the technology was made under a secrecy order for national security reasons. But I kept on moving with that. And so I started another company besides the skincare company, and that's Pericone Defense Research, and have a lot of technology in that. And then at the same time, working with my skincare, I was interested in transdermal technology and developed something where I can deliver biologically active peptides without having to use a needle for injection. And my latest venture is hydrogen water, because I believe that inflammation is behind aging and aging-related diseases. And so I was always looking for what I call the magic bullet, and came across hydrogen, which was in Japan at the time. Was very skeptical because hydrogen is a nonpolar molecule, it doesn't interact. Went to Japan, talked to the scientists, came back and did my own studies. Totally convinced that this is the future for health in this country and every country in the world. And so I started my Perricone hydrogen water company about 7 years ago as well. And I think in the future, we're going to see some really interesting things happening with this, because when you drink hydrogen, it does a couple of things on a cellular level. It mimics fasting, and it mimics exercise. And so it's kind of like a dream. How can I sit on my couch and do my workout? And that just means lifting the hydrogen water. So that's a
well, you just sold me as a client, I can tell you that.
Great.
Yeah, so coming to the, I understand that you're in the works of a new book and you continue to publish. So the first book wasn't the end of it. Give us a little bit peek about the rest of the books. It seems like you've been published multiple times.
Yes, there's a total of 12 books, but 8 were more for consumption by the consumer, and 5 of them actually achieved #1 status in the New York Times. And I was very happy with this because I was teaching people about nutrition. And nutrition is critical, and people want to look good and they want to feel good. So my skincare company actually taught people a 3-tiered program, which is the most important one is how you eat. It's beauty from the inside out. And then, of course, if you have the resources, you can also take supplements with anti-inflammatory activity. And finally, you can use topicals that have anti-inflammatory activity, but it has to be able to penetrate into the skin. That's where my transdermal company came in. And so it worked out well, because wherever I go in the world, people will walk up to me and say, you really changed my life. And so it wasn't about using just a topical product, but changing their diet and supplements and approaching this. And it's quite interesting. when I talked about inflammation back in late 90s and in 2000, I was a assistant clinical professor at Yale teaching some dermatology and with my practice. And there was a lot of pushback from the academics. They thought this inflammation thing was totally absurd. And there was a lot of pressure on me on that. And finally, about 2005 or 2006, it was on the cover of Time magazine. And then for some reason, even though academic papers don't move people, Time magazine does. And so now it's mainstream. But I feel very happy about things. And I'm very happy about still pursuing that magic bullet. I think hydrogen is the answer, by the way. And I am really enjoying what I do. I have a lot of patents in areas of medicine and aerospace and other areas. I think numbers about 150 to 175 patents too. So I just like doing, I like learning, and I really want to do what I can to help everybody around me.
That's an amazing thing. Yes, I completely agree. Speaking about inflammation a while back certainly would have been, taboo almost in the medical communities. Certainly an area that has recently seen a lot more indication. But I mean, as a dermatologist, I would assume that, seeing skin conditions such as eczema, psoriasis, and autoimmune in general, where the inflammation seems to be a primary focus, you would be able to convince people quite early into the process and say, look, this is, and it's it seems it is very much diet related, and it is very much a problem. So I'm surprised that it took that long, but we're glad that you were able to push that through, and that here we are. Tell us a little about where the journey takes you further.
Well, in a few areas, it's very exciting. In the defense research, I'm currently working on a new form of thrust that can be used that will not produce any CO2, and it's a totally new concept. It does use hydrogen, but we're not oxidizing hydrogen, which is totally different from anybody else, and so that's sort of a big focus right now. In the area of the transdermal, we're really excited about some of the things we're doing there, because we can now take biologically active peptides that could not be used because you can't take them orally, they get digested. And you can't really put them intravenously because enzymes break them down. So we have this whole armamentarium of biologically active peptides that we can now access. And so we're looking at a lot of different disease processes, and it looks like it's going to be very, very positive. And then finally, in the hydrogen water is most interesting to me. We did a study in India looking at patients who had something called the metabolic syndrome. And the metabolic syndrome is a classification based on both clinical findings, blood work, and then physical findings. And it's obesity, and there's high blood sugar and elevated insulin. And the metabolic syndrome is the precursor of virtually all Western diseases. So you move on to type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes, increased incidence of cancer, cognitive decline, heart disease, we can go on forever here. And so in this study, we put subjects on hydrogen water twice a day. Didn't ask them to change their diet or anything, and we had a control group who was just getting plain water. And at the end of 24 weeks, the people actually taking the active hydrogen water no longer could be categorized as having metabolic syndrome. So the implications of that are enormous, in that it means that if we don't have metabolic syndrome, we're not going to move on to all these Western diseases. And being conservative, if we put, say, the United States of America on hydrogen water, I believe that within 2 to 3 years, we could lower the healthcare cost by $1 trillion, and that's very conservative. It's also interesting in that paper that was published on the study of metabolic syndrome in India, that the chief scientist, for some reason, didn't feel it was important enough to say that the average weight loss was 8 pounds without changing anything except drinking hydrogen water. But it's a very good paper. I think it establishes the fact that this is the future. The thing is how to get people interested. And of course, I've certainly marketed many things in my life, and I think hydrogen water is quite interesting, but it doesn't seem to be getting picked up. It's very subtle. When you drink it, you have a little bit of increase of energy, and you can't see on a cellular level that it's throwing those switches that are mimicking exercise, or throwing those switches that are mimicking fasting, which are all very positive for our health. So I do believe it has to be for the future. Whether it would be government involved, They can be, but I don't think they're paying attention right now. We have a lot of other problems in the world. So the future is interesting to me. It never seems to end. I want to complete this propulsion project because it can be used in automobiles, jets, rockets, whatever we're going to do. Hydrogen water, I think, was really going to be preventive medicine, which of course is what I always wanted to accomplish. And then of course, with my new book, I'm explaining this whole thing in a very different way because I've narrowed it down to one molecule in the body.
Wow, it's mind blowing. Especially coming from a published and cited and so well researched and studied and author. That there could be simple solutions to such complex problems, and the numbers that you talk about in reducing, and all of this is looking at prevention as preventative medicine, not so much as medicine itself. Combined with your nutrition side of it, it seems like you are the Ponce de Leon that we've been looking for. So I'm looking forward to seeing more and more from you about this, and expecting that we'll see more in the future about research in this area, and for peer review and for vindication in your faith in this and to bettering mankind. It's an interesting thing, and I asked Karl to get on simply because of the fact that Karl Seelig is anything. He's the curator of Digital Davos, of course. He's a host. He's a banker. He's a hedge fund manager. He has many different hats, and he is a medical doctor. And at the same time, he's co-authored a book, and the book is with Edgar Segerson, and this book is a very interesting book because I read it, and it was kind of a book that starts with the double slit experiment. And so Karl, let me have you jump in a little bit and talk a little bit about your book, because I'd really love for the two of you to have a little conversation.
Thank you very much, Anand. So, first, I must to say for because it was really delightful to hear you speak, and I'm impressed. What Edgar and me, we were meeting a lot of times. We were discussing a lot of subjects, interdisciplinary subjects, reaching from quantum physics to consumer psychology to self-help, also to yoga, and to basically how to improve yourself and find happiness. And we saw that it is quite difficult to explain for people sometimes facts which help, but there is no real scientific explanation behind it. Why should I meditate? What is really to do with this? And then we see only some scientific facts which go only in a limited area, for example, psychology, but not like this. So we were looking at the whole construct and thought probably what is needed for a better self-help book is a model. In science, we know models are always used to predict future outcomes, to help us to understand something. I must make totally clear, we all know a model is a model. It's not the reality. When we go to the Bohr atom model and the electron spins around the nucleus, we know there are more complicated other models which are more describing the reality with wave functions and so on. But for certain aspects, the Bohr model is good enough and is much easier to explain for persons to understand. So what we saw is we have to create a model for people to understand the way to think about improving their life, how they can reach happiness. And to start with, and to put it on a fundamental basis. This was the start of the book, and the scientific background from the double split experience we were using first, as we based the model on multidisciplinary aspects, reaching from quantum physics to consumer psychology to also other areas like self-improvement, yoga, mental health. So we thought it is necessary to lay a foundation which is based in physics and to basically show the people that everything changes. You have to start thinking with a model. So the book is called The Reality Dimensions, and it starts with a double split experience, which basically shows that the mere fact of observation can change the quantum, can change that electrons going through one slit or the other one to a wave behavior. And if you observe that there is no wave behavior, for people interested in this, we know also that you can make a quantum delayer, you can let one electron travel farther, and as soon as you measure, you see that it's one wave, it's not anymore wave, it behaves like a particle. If you measure, it behaves something else. The principle is, when you start the book with explaining such a fundamental difference from our perception which we have today, it starts people to question their understanding. And this is necessary for creating a new model. And when you create a new model, you have to go and understand that everyone thinks that they know what an attitude is. Everyone thinks because it's used in the common language. But there's not many people which would think that they know how to draw an atom and tan molecule, because this they never heard, and they would say, okay, draw me one and show me how it is. So we started with the double split experiment in this book. The book helps people to find balance in life. The book helps to find people ways to look at problems in different ways, to understand the entanglements between their life and different actions which they did, and why, for example, meditation is necessary when you detangle yourself for a moment to get a more obvious view. It helps also to understand things, for example, why you have to go and put yourself in other people's shoes to understand it in a business discussion. If not, you speak parallel. And so we started to try to create an open framework, a thought experiment, which helps people to understand and think in another way to approach problems and to keep an open mind. This book was also then later on becoming very interesting for different people in the investment community, which then also started to look at this book. And it was also shown by many people which are on the Fortune 100 list, and they saw it just doesn't make just a sense to move one step up or one step down on the Fortune 100. At one time, you pursued something else than just money. You pursued other things of happiness. And basically, this is another philosophy of life, but it is a model, it's not the reality, it's a model.
Very interesting, Karl. When we look at books such as this, and especially when you're applying it to such a broad field, such as even an investment model, or just how people can get reality and their reality and see things at the same time, yet two different people see two very different things at the same time. So being able to see from another person's perspective certainly helps the mental side. Coming back to you, Dr. Perricone, what I would ask you in this is, what is your thought process on getting adoption? And that's why I thought this book was an interesting segue, because it basically talks about how do you get people to change their behavior. And the only real change happens when they break their own reality and then move to the next reality and accept new things. When you talk about hydrogen water, when you talk about basic nutrition, people that are in a wheel, they just keep going round and round. It just never breaks. So how do you break the cycle?
That's a really good question. And what I found just through experience as a physician and interviewing patients with issues, but also in the beauty business, actually creating things that truly make a difference. And of course, with nutrition, people may be on the wheel and just doing the same thing over and over again. But many of these people, I'd say most people, are not happy with the results they're getting in any aspect of their lives. And that if we change things, and what I used was vanity. If people, my best patients are those with vanity because they want to get better. And the nice thing about the inflammation theory is that it's the final common pathway for everything, but you can actually see a difference, a profound difference in your skin within 3 days. In fact, a very quick story, I know we're limited time. When my book came out, I went on to Good Morning America. And Diane Sawyer said, Dr. Perricone, the claims that you're saying in 3 days you can possibly look 10 years younger. She said, I'm a journalist, I don't buy this. So we went on the air, which she chose 3 people from ABC. They went on the diet, they were sequestered. 3 days later, we were on the air. And we were sitting in the makeup trailer, but they did it outside in Bryant Park in New York. And she said, well, I'm going to really kind of roast you on the air today. I said, well, let's have a look. Well, we walked out of the trailer and she looked across the park and saw the 3 women, and her mouth just opened. She said, I can't believe it. I can see a difference from here. So we went on the air, and when they did before and afters, virtually the book was #1, and you couldn't buy a piece of salmon in all the country for like 2 weeks. So if you can offer someone a way to look better and feel better, and it's nice to have visuals because that makes a difference. But when you're on this program, you do feel absolutely great, and not just the way you look, it's also you elevate your good neurotransmitters, your immune system gets better. And so I think the short answer is, if I could make you feel better, because I don't think I've met anybody really in my practice or out there that wouldn't like to improve how they look or how they feel or what they'd like to accomplish. And so I'm not saying you're going to live to be 100 living this program, but how about staying healthy and compressing morbidity to a very short time, and rather spending all of our healthcare money in the last year of life? And people really understand that. So we all have a mission here. I don't care what you're doing, you have a mission on this planet. And to achieve that, you have to have a healthy mind and a healthy body. And we can do all of these. And people like Dr. Seelig, he's approaching this in another way. And I really love the whole concept. I can't wait to read the book.
Wonderful. Yeah, we look forward to it. We're running into the next panel, but what I will say to conclude this panel is that you certainly have given me a lot of thought, my material here. I hope that our viewers around the world have gotten the same from you, and we look forward for you to stay on for the next panel. So if you would please just stay on with us, we will add additional panelists for our final panel for Davos, for Digital Davos. Thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing our discussions.